Greetings, my scattered sisters and brothers in the Lord. Trust you know the Lord is with you wherever you find yourself scattered today, and that you know that His presence with you is more than enough for whatever you might face today. I want to spend one more session on Mark chapter 10, Jesus teaching about marriage and divorce, and it's chapter 10, verses 1 through 12. And we've talked a little bit about the location of this passage in terms of being right in the center of cross-teaching number 2 and cross-teaching number 3. And the disciples have been arguing about who's the greatest, and Jesus emphasized if you want to be the greatest, you got to be the servant of all. And then we move to the next kind of topic, and it's marriage and divorce. Where else do you need to be a servant more than in your marriage? And so very interesting kind of the location of this passage between the teachings of the cross, the teaching of servanthood as a key element of discipleship. And then we looked at the trap and how the question about divorce is it lawful, is it permissible for a man to divorce his wife, how that was a trap question. And is Jesus going to be one of them and say yes, and basically tell people what they want to hear at some level? Or is Jesus going to say no, and then they'll say, well, Moses commanded it. Who are you compared to Moses? And so they'll have Jesus kind of trapped in terms of being not one who follows Moses, and even more being trapped as one who is kind of against divorcees and try to turn people against him that way. But Jesus kind of navigated the trap by asking them what Moses said, and then Jesus takes it back to creation. And that's where we're going to go today. And so, again, picking it up, Mark chapter 10. And Jesus left there and went to the region of Judea beyond the Jordan, and crowds gathered to him again. And again, as was his custom, he taught them. And Pharisees came up and, in order to test him, asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" Jesus answered them, "What did Moses command you?" They said, "Moses allowed the man to write a certificate of divorce and to send her away." And Jesus said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, he wrote you this commandment. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. They are no longer two, but one flesh. So whatever therefore God has joined together, let not man separate." And in the house the disciples asked him again about this matter. And he said to them, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery." So a couple things I want us to hit on here. Maybe three things. So first, divorce was not the design. That was a concession because their hearts were hard. Jesus takes us back to the design, that in the beginning God created us male and female, and that for this reason a man will leave his father and mother, hold fast to his wife, the two of them will become one flesh. And so what God has joined together, let no one separate. And so divorce was never the design. Marriage is meant to be permanent. It's meant to create a lifelong bond, a family bond that's indestructible. And so that was never the design. Divorce was simply a concession because of hardness of heart. And so, our marriage vows are, till death do us part. It's not supposed to be the marriage that kills you. And so I get it that there are cases, there are instances, I've seen it, to where the concession is necessary, becomes a way forward when there is no way forward because of hard-heartedness. But we always have to remember that that's a concession, that's not the design. And Jesus calls us to live into the design rather than to settle for the concession. And so I think one of the problems in their culture as well as in our culture is that people are looking for a concession, and rather than actually living into God's design, the permanence of marriage. That brings us to kind of the second thing I want to call attention to, is that this bond, it's pretty permanent. The two shall become one. And so Jesus goes on to say that if a man divorces his wife and marries someone else, he's committed adultery against his wife. And he goes on to say that if the wife divorces her husband and marries another man, then she has committed adultery against her husband. And so what that tells me is that the divorce didn't actually undo the marriage, that the divorce didn't break the marriage bond or the family bond that's created in divorce. And so the paperwork doesn't make somebody single again. And so I think, in cases in cases where adultery has already been committed, that bond, that is, you've already had adultery, it's broken. But here, the context is that, okay, you took advantage of the concession and you think you can remarry, and you can, but it's not like you're single again. And so the permanence of that marriage bond, if you were really single again, if the divorce really ended the marriage, then there would be no adultery taking place in the remarriage. And so again, Jesus doesn't say thou shalt not remarry, kind of assumes that people will, but just calling attention to the permanence of that marriage bond. And so that's something we need to remember. I think our culture tries to make it like divorce. You can be single again, that the divorce actually ends the marriage or ends that bond. But no, that bond is pretty permanent. It's pretty lifelong. And so we need to be aware of that. And then I think the third thing I want to just call attention to, and we've mentioned this before, is Jesus takes us back to Genesis. That when Jesus is questioned about marriage, when he's questioned about divorce, the place he goes is Genesis 1 and 2. That needs to be where we go when we face our questions about marriage, our questions about divorce, all the questions that our contemporary culture throws at us. Jesus gives us a guide here. Go back to Genesis 1 and 2. And then finally, don't want to eliminate grace. That is by the grace of Jesus that we're able to live into all of our commitments. It's by the grace of Jesus that we're able to live into God's design for marriage, God's design for our lives. And so wherever you find yourself scattered today, I know that divorce touches every one of us in one way or another, but realize that there's grace. Grace to be new and grace to live into God's design given to us there in Genesis 1 and 2. So God bless, have a great day, and may God give us all grace to live into his design for how our lives are to be lived. God bless.